back to the writing biz. Today, my guest is Matty Dalrymple. She is the author of the Lizzie Ballard thrillers and the Anne Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts. She's a member of the International Thriller Writers and also the Sisters in Crime. Matty also podcasts, writes, speaks, and consults on the writing craft and the publishing voyage as the Indy Author, and that's Indy with INDY. Her articles have appeared in Writer's Digest magazine, and she's a partner member of the Alliance of Independent Authors. Today, we're discussing how having multiple income streams leads to a successful writing career. Matty, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so looking forward to this talk.
I am as well. Thank you so much for the invitation. I was looking at some of your backlist episodes, and I see we've had some common guests, including the lovely Michael Laran and also John Didakis.
Yes, they're both terrific people. Yeah. I followed Michael for a long time and enjoyed his content so much as well. And needless to say, John Didakis is just a really interesting guy.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start with how an author mentally shifts from being just a writer to treating their work like an intellectual property firm and with multiple assets to monetize, because that shift does have to happen to get that mindset that now we're in business and we have to hit the ground running.
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is to think about what your goals are. And so if you are writing the book of your heart, or you're writing like a history of your family, or, something else that is maybe not going to hit the bestseller lists just because of the nature of the beast, then that is fine, but you need to understand that going in. And so one of the things I like to talk about with the authors that I consult with is, what are your goals? What are your plans? And are your plans aligned with your goals? So that if you're writing the book of your heart and you're not really looking at the market, then that's fine, but don't expect to retire on the proceeds. If you're looking to retire on the proceeds, then you need to take a different perspective. And the other sort of sad truth that I think is important to share when talking about income is, especially on the fiction front, it's going to be very unusual for an author to make a lot of money with one book. And so there could be exceptions to that. I would say, especially on the nonfiction front, I think someone who writes a successful nonfiction book, especially when it's paired with other things, and we're going to be talking about that more, other things like speaking engagements or consulting or paving the way to a job you're looking for, then maybe one book will do it. But I think the first thing to do, as you're suggesting with the reference to multiple books, is maybe after you finished your first book, maybe the best thing to do is write your second book instead of spending too much time on the first book. But as you develop a portfolio, then thinking about the ways you can use that, the ways you can protect yourself legally, the ways you can make the most of that IP, you really kind of have to wear a different hat. You have to have your creator hat, you have to have your editor hat, and then you have to have your business hat that says, now I'm going to look at this not as a work of art, but as a product. And that's what IP is.
Right. And that's a difficult shift sometimes.
Yeah.
I do agree with you about spending not as much time putting out the first book you're working on. I know some authors get further along in their series before they even release the first book so that they can kind of surmount that problem a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think I could ever do that. I hear about these people who decide they're going to write 6 books and then release them, one a month for half a year or something like that. I'm like, oh my goodness, how can you write a book and not want to get it into the hands of at least a small group of readers? But certainly that is a strategy that some authors have the emotional fortitude to follow.
I actually do that. I'm working on a 5-book series and I'm 3 books in.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But I found as I got into the 3rd book that I need to come back and rewrite some of the first book. So that's one reason I'm glad I did that, because it gives me the ability to do that before the first book is released. And then they find out the story doesn't really follow through in the other one. So I had to go back and fix it. The story just got better. That's
a great craft tip that you can, instead of having to work around those things, as someone who, both of my series were not originally planned as series. And so sometimes I wrote myself into a corner and took some thought and creativity to figure out how to continue a story and stay true to the earlier books.
Exactly. It's not always that easy, is it? So What some of the examples of income streams that you've seen work successfully for authors? Because it's a very interesting question. There's so many different choices and so many different avenues that you could take to earn money. What have you found works well?
Well, I think that the universal piece of advice is to make the book available in as many formats as possible. And so the easy formats are ebook, print, and then perhaps large print. There are functions out there or functions that I believe are soon coming that make it very easy for an author who has an ebook to, without a lot of extra time or money investment, create a print book. There's still lots and lots of people who like to read in print, so don't overlook that as a way of reaching people. If you find there's sufficient interest in your book in ebook and print, then audio is something certainly to explore. Audio, along with cover design, I think is the other most expensive financial outlay that an indie author can make. And so I think it's often wise, especially with a first book, to see if there is sufficient interest to justify the cost of and the time of doing an audiobook, even if you're doing it yourself. And I'm thinking here more of nonfiction books. I think author-narrated audiobooks work best for nonfiction because there isn't the sort of performance expectation that there is with fiction, but you're still investing your time. And that's an important income-related thing to think about. Never say it's free just because you spent, every evening for 3 months working on it. No, your time has value too. So in terms of making the most of your intellectual property, make it available to people in as many ways as you can in different formats. I think that the conversation about multiple streams of income really lends itself most to people who are writing nonfiction. And so for me, I now have 5 nonfiction books for writers, 2 of which were co-authored with your previous guest, Michael Laron. And I really went into those not necessarily expecting to make loads of money from the book itself, but using them as a calling card to speaking engagements. And so speaking engagements is certainly, if you're a nonfiction author, something that you can pursue. I think that if you're a fiction author, the equivalent of speaking engagements would be author events where you might be able to sell your book in person. You do a reading and then you sell your book at the back of the room or what have you. I've spoken a couple of times on the Indy Author Podcast with Todd Fonestock about in-person selling, another possible stream of income, especially for fiction authors who have books in a genre that has enthusiastic readers who will go to conferences in order to meet the authors of the books they love. And there again, there's an investment that's needed. This is not just money coming in. You're investing time and money to get to those kinds of events. So I think that the overall theme is just don't think of your book as one thing. Think of all the different ways that it can be sliced and diced, that can be shared with readers, that can be shared with listeners to make the most you can, the most financial benefit you can of that piece of IP.
If you're going to move forward as a writer, think about the continuity of that, particularly in nonfiction. So try to stay in the same area, your expertise, instead of jumping around to all different kinds of interests. It will help you build that core audience that will follow you throughout your career.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you don't change avenues. I'm just saying that, make sure that you have that presence built.
Yeah.
Before.
Well, I know for my nonfiction books, I was writing them as I felt I had accumulated enough information on a topic to want to commit it to a book, and feeling like it was information that would help people earlier in their voyage in that same area, like podcasting as a host or podcasting as a guest or co-authoring nonfiction, marketing short fiction, being an author speaker. And so I wasn't seeing them necessarily in a holistic way. I wish I could look back and say, oh yeah, this was all carefully planned out book by book. But what I realized was actually pretty recently with my consulting clients is that the common theme was platform building. And so I found that my consulting clients, I was getting a certain number of clients who were not who I had expected, which was people who had written a book and were saying to themselves, oh, what do I do with it now? I certainly consult with those people as well. But I was also getting this cohort of consultees that had a book, a nonfiction book, and they were now looking for ways to get out word about it. And when I started talking to them about ways they could do that, like they could start a podcast, they could be on podcasts, they could maybe co-author another work with someone else. I realized I was mentioning the things that I had books about. And it was at that point that it really became clear to me that there was this platform building theme that I wanted to formalize. And then as a result of that, I ended up spinning up a platform called From Expertise to Authority, because I saw a need among, especially the nonfiction author community to say, what are all these pieces of either multiple streams of income or maybe just multiple platform building opportunities that you can bring together in a holistic way?
Right. I looked at that program just briefly. I've been following you for a while. So when you came up with the program, I went and looked at it, and it's very interesting. And I think that would be really valuable to a new nonfiction author to have somebody guide them through that process, because it is difficult to understand. And when you're going into a speaking environment, you're going into an environment where a lot of people are very experienced. And of course, you don't want this, maybe my anxiety talking, you don't want to go into that without the feeling that you can perform well. The more prepared you are, the easier it is.
Yes, and the more clearly I think you can define who your audience is. So I generally focus on authors earlier in their career. So I'm not doing consulting on things like a deep dive into how to optimize your Facebook ads. I'm talking more strategically about career questions. What do you want out of this career, and what are some options for pursuing that goal? I think the same holds true of being a speaker, and this can certainly influence your success of using speaking as a stream of income, that you want to make sure that if what you're doing is sharing foundational information to prepare people for a certain path, then you're not pitching that in a way that makes it sound like you're going to be talking to other, people further along in their career, because then you have a disappointed audience, and now perhaps you cut off that stream of income because word gets around that you're not delivering on what the promise of your talk is. And so I think maybe another theme regarding streams of income is really understand who your audience is, make your message about who you're trying to reach crystal clear. And the other thing I would say is share generously. I definitely say this to nonfiction author clients, that sometimes people will say, well, I don't want to share too much information in this podcast interview because then maybe people won't buy my book. And I say, you can share every single thing that's in your book and people will still buy your book. People appreciate and are willing to contribute income to people who share generously, and you don't need to worry about cannibalizing sales by being generous with what you have to offer.
That's absolutely true. You should yell that from the mountaintop. Now, I know that authors can feel overwhelmed sometimes when we talk about additional income streams and the extra work that it involves, whether it's running a successful Kickstarter campaign or building a Patreon community or Substack community, or any of the many different things that you can do. What do you think is a framework, a criteria that authors can use to decide the revenue stream to build next that doesn't burn them out or divert their focus from the main thing that they should be doing, which is writing?
Yeah, well, I think that one thing, and this goes back to the idea that you have to assign value to your time as well as your money, is that every new thing you pick to do means that you have to stop doing something else. And often this is very common at writers' conferences. You'll go and you'll hear a bunch of fantastic ideas, and you'll think, oh, I'm gonna send out my newsletter twice as often, and I'm gonna get active on Blue Sky, and oh, I realize that I have to be optimizing my SEO or whatever. And just realizing that whenever you pick one of those things, something else has to drop off. And you can assess it in a couple of different ways. I mean, if income is your primary goal, then you assess it based on what is making you the least profit from the time you're investing. If your goal is something else, like maintaining a connection with your personal community or something like that, then you assess what is feeding that goal least, and that's the thing you drop off. So recognizing the time is limited and you have to decide what to do with it. And then the other thing that I'm a big fan of is repurposing. And so a good example of this is that I just decided I'd spoken to recently on the Indy Author Podcast. They spoke with Elle Griffin about serializing fiction. And it was well timed because it was just at the point where I was having a shareable version of my seventh Anne Kinnear suspense novel. And I got very excited about it in a way that I had not gotten excited about Kickstarter. I've talked to a lot of people about Kickstarter, and every time I talk to them about it, I just get vicarious hives. It just sounds awful. And, people would say, no, you should give it a try. And I'm like, if I'm this angsty about it and I'm just like hearing somebody else talk about it, this is not going to be for me. But I really got excited about serializing my novel. And it was relatively low impact because I was publishing content that I had already created. And of course, as is always the case, I somewhat underestimated the amount of additional work it would take to spin up a Substack and create the surrounding content and understand, how these interactions were supposed to take place and so on. But it wasn't like spinning up a Substack where I needed to create all the content new. And so I think if you're looking for those kinds of opportunities, especially if it's kind of experimental, think about those things where you already have material to use and it's just going to be tweaking it. Like maybe you're thinking about moving on to another social media site, or maybe you're thinking of spinning up a live community of people who have similar interests, maybe a membership community, for example, and find ways that you can do that with content you already have, and also find ways to do it as a small test, not going whole hog into it before you sort of dipped your toe in the water.
It's interesting because I suggest that writers utilize the research they've done for their books as part of their content strategy, because people are always interested in learning more. So if you're doing a book on a particular culture or time, or even nonfiction, a particular subject, and there's other information out there that is supporting of what you're doing, share that information in your channels, and it'll help to build your authority and show that you're just as interested in these things as your readers are. I think it's a really good way to build up some content.
Yeah, and I think that the other sort of investment you have to consider that you're suggesting is there's the money investment, there's the time investment, but there's like the psychic energy investment too. And so don't discount that, because you pay a price, you cut into your income, even if you're thinking of income as in a more generalized way, if you're doing something you hate. So TikTok is a perfect example for me. Like when TikTok first came out, I went onto it for like 45 seconds and, because everybody was talking about how it was a great platform for writers. And I just hated it. And I thought, if I hate it this much as a consumer of the content, I'm not going to be good at creating content. Like I don't like being on video. I'm not good at, I love having conversations, but I'm not really good at solo sort of holding forth on things. And, people would say, oh, but, people are killing it over on TikTok or Book Talk. And I was like, maybe, but I really don't feel like investing the emotional energy or the money or the time in order to set up a platform there. And I also didn't think it was a platform where the people I'm trying to reach were hanging out. So I think weighing all these things, not jumping on something that comes along just because you've heard at a writer's conference that, this is the way to add another stream of income to your multiple streams of income. You really have to weigh it carefully.
No, you're absolutely right. I had Nina Mir on a recent episode, and she suggests creating a book plan, which is perfect for nonfiction writers, a book business plan that will guide you through the writing and publishing process. And it helps you to narrow down those type of things. What do I want to do? Where do I want to spend my energy? What do I have time for? I myself, before I started this podcast, I spent 2 weeks doing interstitial journaling so that I could see where I was wasting time, because I have my own business and clients that count on me, and it takes me time to run my business, and I have a life and I like to write. So I really had to make sure that I had that time, because I didn't want to disappoint my guests or my audience by not doing it properly. But that was a godsend to me. And I still, every day when I go through my tasks for the day, I still do it in that method, not as intensely up to the minute, but with that method. And it keeps me on track and helps me see those blocks of time. Like I had a call with a girlfriend the other day that was business for the first 5 minutes, and the other 40 minutes was not. So it's good to know that. Not that I regret the phone call, but
Yeah.
it's good to know where your time's gone that day. You're like, oh, I wasted 45 minutes, but I need to get all these things done. So I need to work 45 minutes later than I thought, things like that.
Yeah, well, I think that idea of tracking your time is great foundational information for making these choices about what am I going to stop doing if I start doing this. And it's just so easy to let lots of time get sucked away on things that aren't really paying you back. So an example would
It's
be that my podcast listeners are tired of probably of me hearing me say that now I have transcripts. Now I don't have transcripts anymore. Now I have transcripts. Now I don't have transcripts anymore, because it was something I started doing because, transcripts, that's cool. That's a good, offering for my listeners. There are some people I know who like reading the transcripts more than they like listening to the audio. And it took me a while to realize how much time I was spending on creating the transcripts. And I eventually just stopped doing it because, it was something I was offering for free. And yet it would take me a couple of hours a week. And I just thought there are lots of better ways for me to be using a couple of hours a week than creating a transcript that only a very small portion of my listenership is using. And then as AI transcription got better, I was able to resume doing it. But yeah, you get so like in the weeds that you're not stepping back and saying, wait, I just spent half a day on that. Was that worthwhile? So I love
right.
that
What's the
idea of
value?
tracking it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that because I've been in situations like that myself. Well, like I said, one of my business owners, web design. Well, with web design, because the technology grows so fast, there's a lot of learning time that I have to spend to keep up with the services so I can provide the best experience for my clients. And I have caught myself many times spending half a day learning something and then saying, what, this isn't going to work. Why am I doing this? And it's just disappointing when that happens. But when you're trying to create things and build a business, you really have to be good at time management and keeping yourself in line. And sometimes, like I said, I fall off the cliff. I try really hard.
Well, and I also think it's important to realize that one is not going to be able to monetize every minute of the day. There's just, you might have just needed that 40 minutes of chatting with your girlfriend to, give you the energy to do something else. And so I do think that the danger of too much emphasis on productivity in terms of multiple streams of income is, so I'll tell a story on myself. I totally believe that the best ideas come to me when I'm up from my desk and, out walking the dog. And those are often the ideas that lead to a money-making opportunity for me. And I'm very bad at making myself get up from the desk and take those breaks because I'm also very task-oriented. And so I'm like, oh, I could just like check 3 more things off my Trello list. And so I think it may sound counterintuitive, but giving yourself an opportunity to play is sometimes the foundation of real concrete financial benefits that you'll enjoy as a result of doing that.
I agree. I try to make it a strict rule that my days, usually the business portion of it, this part when we're running my business, ends at 4 o'clock. And I've cut out time on a few days to deal with the podcast. The reason I do that is for that. I need that mental rest. And then also there's other things I love in my life. I love to write. I love to paint. I love to draw. I love to read. And I've worked really hard all my life to get to where I have time for these things. And I'm not just trying to feed people, and give them a place to live. So I protect that time.
Yeah.
And I think you're exactly right. You have to have that time to play and to let yourself breathe, to be really good at whatever you're trying to do. I think
Yeah.
it's just vital.
Yeah, and if you're going into a speaking engagement that you're going to get paid money for, but you're exhausted because, you used every hour the night before trying to pack some other thing in, then, that's actually going to make a hit on your wallet in addition to a hit on your mental well-being.
I had an issue the other day where I was trying to edit a podcast for a client, and I made, how it's systematic, right? So I was doing things in the wrong order, and I'm very control oriented person. So I'm doing it in the wrong order, or I'm forgetting to do something. And I finally just had to close the laptop and say, I cannot deal with this today, and stop and give myself time to rest, because you can't function like that when you're overtired and under a lot of pressure. It's really hard.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that kind of exhaustion affects is that I would say all the streams of income that I've developed as an indie author publisher have been, in some cases, a direct result of, and in other cases, heavily supported by the network of people I've developed. And so I almost hate to say network. I'd rather say community. It sounds less creepy. It sounds like less LinkedIn-ish.
Right.
But the community of people I've built has really enabled many of my streams of income. So, for example, I co-authored 2 books with Michael Aran. I co-authored 2 books with Mark Leslie Lefebvre because I reached out to him about a topic that he had discussed on his Dark Reflections podcast, and that ended up being a book, like speaking engagements, contract writing opportunities, and so on. And I think that when you're hunched over your Trello list or your to-do list or your Post-it notes or whatever it is, and you're not kind of, again, raising yourself back from the details, and you're looking around at your environment and finding ways to connect with other people that might be able to help you and you might be able to help, then that's a really important part of developing those multiple streams of income as well.
Did you say that you have a book on co-authoring?
I do.
Nonfiction?
Yeah, Michael Aran and I, we co-authored
Okay,
the From Page to Platform, How to Succeed as an Author Speaker. And then we wrote a book based on that experience about co-authoring nonfiction.
I'm going to have to pick that up. I have your one on how to be a guest. And the reason I picked that up was to be able to guide my guests into whatever my expectations were. But that sounds really interesting. I'm going to check that out.
And that is really a good example of the repurposing. So I actually started writing what became the Podcast Guest Playbook because I wanted some high level information to share both with my podcast guests before the interview, but also because I was spinning up another consulting arm to help people prepare for podcast interviews, where I would basically interview them. I would record and edit the interview, and then we would meet and we would debrief the experience. And I thought it would be great if I could give them a document, that captures some of these common things. And then as I kept writing tips, I was getting longer and longer, and I realized that it was potentially a book. And then I was at Author Nation, and I had lunch with Mark Leslie Lefebvre, and I was telling him about the book, which was from my point of view at that point, 85% done. And he said, "Oh, are you looking for a co-author with that?" And I thought, yes, because what I realized the book could really benefit from was more personal stories. And Mark Lefebvre is the king of personal stories, and great illustrative examples of things that I was trying to describe in the book. So that was one of those things where something I was doing anyway became a stream of income, even though that wasn't my original purpose for it.
It's interesting how those things come into your life. Like whatever, had an interview with Richard Sparks, who's an author and screenwriter, just such a wonderful man. And we were talking about that, how doors open when they're supposed to, but you have to be able to see that open door. And there you were having lunch, and he saw the opportunity and you saw the opportunity, and you were able to do something together. That's terrific.
Yeah.
I love those kind of experiences.
Yeah.
They just, yeah. And plus you probably over the journey, I'm sure you made even better friends. So there's a big plus there too.
Yeah, exactly.
So looking at the big picture over the next few years, which emerging revenue channels do you think authors should be positioning themselves for. Before we talk about, actually, I just wanted to stop a second. I had an interview today with a gentleman about AI and how AI is having such an impact on the publishing business. And he's created a tool called Origin that helps authors prove that they've written the material that they've written.
Oh, don't tell me who.
And
I know
he's
who
really,
this is. I'm blanking on the name.
Gordon McClellan
Yes,
is his
yes.
name.
Yes, of Dark Frog Brooks.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly. Yeah, it was such an interesting conversation. But the reason I brought it up is being a nonfiction author in this industry, I would just like your perspective on how that is changing the industry from your point of view with this plethora of books that are being put out there. They're AI generated, that nonfiction art authors that actually work at their craft are having to compete against.
Yeah.
You mentioned the personal stories. Of course, that's one piece that an AI can't put together. So just shortly, tell me how you felt about that change in the industry.
So the really Reader's Digest condensed version of this is that I don't try to convince people pro or con for using AI for their creative work. I think that nobody's going to be listening to this podcast who's interested in like prompting an AI, pushing a button, and then sending it to KDP. Like that's just not our audience, right? We're talking to people who love to write. The extent to which people want to use AI to support that, I totally leave that up to them. I think that one of the things that is happening is that there's more of a recognition that this is not an either or. I think it kind of harks back to, if you think about when indie publishing was coming up and it was an either or question. You were either trad published or indie published. That was it. And I think that now we recognize that it's much more of a spectrum. I think the same is true of use of AI. Like if I'm searching for a word to put in a sentence and I'm coming up blank and I go to ChatGPT and I say, what's that word that's kind of like a combination of angry and frustrated? And it will save me hours of pondering because it might come back with the right word or it might not. It's up to me to decide. I think that if people are not using it for their business side of their publishing, I really think they're doing themselves a disadvantage. And I just don't think that, I think if you use the filter of your readers, like, is the reader going to care? I don't think any reader is going to be upset if they find out that their favorite author used AI to help write the sales description that shows up on Amazon. I
agree.
That's just a very, very different writing skill set than writing a novel. And as an example, one thing that I had never put in my sales descriptions, which was a big miss for me that I didn't realize until I asked AI to draft a sales description for me, is a list of the tropes that are in the book, perfect for readers who love closed door mysteries and a woman on the run. I just never thought to put those in there. So I think that it really behooves people to explore it for the business purposes, because it frees you up to spend more time doing the actual human writing that we all want to do. And then I
agree about that.
Yeah. The other thing I'll just add specifically with regard to multiple streams of income is the one area where I see AI could be a real enabler of more human work is translations. So I think that the idea that I could conceivably push a button and suddenly have my book available in German or French or Spanish or whatever is very interesting, but I would never publish something that had not been looked at by a human editor. I would never pay for a human editor, a human translator to translate an entire book. That's just, I would have no expectation that I would earn my money back on that kind of investment. But someday I would consider pushing the button on something, spitting out like the French translation, and then hiring a native French-speaking editor to edit it for me. So I think this is kind of one of the few win-win areas in the AI creative world where it opens up another stream of income. I think for a lot of people, pursuing translations would have been too expensive. And I think that there are going to be a lot of native speaker editors that are going to have a lot of work coming their way because an author wants their AI translation tidied up by an actual human being.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because then you're seeing the benefit of the AI as creating work. for somebody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot about this. That's one thing that I keep hitting upon is people are saying, actually, it's not I'm going to say not taking as many jobs as you think, as helping people be better at their jobs or to gain more experience more quickly to pull themselves up to a better position. I thought that was really interesting to think about it that way.
Yeah. And I
Some
think
people
for
will not agree, but I mean, it's, you have to be open to at
yeah.
least looking at the things and researching it and figuring it out for yourself.
And I do think it's heartening to look at if you play around with AI to actually write, it's pretty bad. It's still pretty bad. And I'm like, I'm glad to see this. Like, none of this is really publishable. I mean, it is publishable, but it's not interesting.
Especially in fiction.
Yeah.
It's just awful.
Yeah.
But I was telling Gordon, I've spent years as a copywriter, writing for blogs and websites and everything for people all over the world, doing all different kinds of things. And it's something I really love doing. It's just I decided to go in a different direction several years ago. My point is, I write like a copy editor when I'm doing descriptions or anything like that, whether it's for a book or doing web copy for my clients that I have now. And AI writes like me because AI has been fed that type of material. So it's good at producing SEO centered content, and things of that nature, which is something that took me a long time to learn how to do. But I would guarantee if you put my writing next to something that's AI generated, that you would not see much difference, especially if it's writing I've done for a client, because I'm not telling my personal story. I'm telling whatever story they want me to tell about their business or their product.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just something that I think about. So back to the question, do you see any emerging revenue channels that we should keep an eye on?
Well, I think translation is one of those. Like, I do think that translation is going to become realistic for people because of AI, as long as they're getting a human editor to review it. I think that this isn't exactly additional revenue streams per se as it is more of a business pivot. But I do think that one thing I'm seeing among a lot of people is just general social media fatigue. And this is one where I feel like the social media platforms are shooting themselves in the foot because, I like Facebook. I spend a certain amount of time scrolling and I love cute puppy video as much as the next person. But as soon as I started realizing that I had to assess each puppy video to see if it was AI generated or not. Like, I'm not really interested in seeing fake cute puppy videos. I want to see real cute puppy videos. And so I found myself spending less and less time on social media. And I believe I'm not the only one. And so I'm downplaying my reliance on platforms like Facebook or LinkedIn as a way of earning income, as a pathway to earning income. And I'm focusing more on platforms like Substack, where the humanity of the people behind the content is clearer. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of AI generated content on Substack, but you can kind of find, you can see it and avoid it if you want to.
Right. It's easier.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so I think that a great way to pave the way to income earning is to lean into your humanity, as they say, and find the places where you can interact with people in that human way. And then I think that the other change I'm making in my own business as a result of less reliance on social media is I'm focusing on advertising in places where readers are going to look for books, like BookBub. And so I'm downplaying the investments I'm making in like Facebook ads, and I'm reinvesting that money in BookBub ads because I want to go where people are looking for their next read, not necessarily where I'm trying to stop their scroll in between the cute puppy videos. So I think that the platforms that are going to be successful in people finding their readers, finding their clients, finding event organizers if they're interested in having speaking engagements be part of their toolkit is going to become more and more important.
I've been paying a lot more attention to BookBub recently as a reader. And one thing I love about it, it's not as busy as Amazon.
Yeah.
I mean, you have all these other things that distract you because they sell everything under the sun. You know,
Yeah.
I'll be in the middle of looking for a book and I'll see something on, I'm just saying, a vacuum. And now
Yeah.
I'm over here looking at vacuums for 45 minutes to an hour.
Yep.
So that's one thing I do appreciate. It helps keep my self-centered on my intention when I clicked on their website.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get lost nowadays.
Yeah.
Well, Matty, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy life to join me today. This has been an interesting talk, and I can't say enough how much I love your podcast. If you haven't seen it, please go and check it out. And you can find her on YouTube at Indy Author, INDY
Yeah.
Author. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. This has been great.
It really has. You can learn more about the Indy Author Podcast and Matty's endeavors at indieauthor.com, and I'll share your socials and information in the show notes. To learn more about this podcast, you can visit thewritingbiz.com and sign up to be the first to learn about new episodes when they release and much more. And until next time, take what you've learned and put it to work in your own writing biz. Thank you, Matty.
Thank you, Laura.